I'm not into hyperbole. If you listen to this show, and you have for any length of time, like you kind of know my cadence and how I handle things. I don't like to talk about this is the greatest blank of all times, or that's the worst blank of all time, whatever. I do my best, sometimes to a fault, I'll grant you, to keep things in their proper context. Sometimes to the point even where it annoys you. See midweek games and my inability to care if LSU loses one. It's that kind of thing where I'll sometimes go to extremes to keep things in context. With that said, I have spent a lot of time over the last 24 hours digesting the Scott Woodward news and thinking about how I wanted to approach this. And I keep coming back to the belief that this hire is the most significant move for LSU athletics since Nick Saban was hired in November of 1999. And even then, in November of 1999, after Jerry DiNardo was fired when LSU lost to Houston and Hal Hunter coached the last game and LSU went on their search, even then, Nick Saban wasn't six-time national championship winning coach Nick Saban. He was the Michigan State coach who had a 9-win season. LSU at that point had struck out on all of its premier candidates and were about to start talking to coordinators when Jimmy Sexton reached out to Joe Dean and said, "Do you want to talk to Nick Saban?" And the rest, as they say, is history. Sean Tuohy had something to do with that as well. But I digress. With the benefit of hindsight, we can see how Nick Saban's time in Baton Rouge shaped the last 2 decades. This decision today, to me, feels like the decision that will shape the next 2 decades of LSU athletics. In hiring Scott Woodward, LSU has instantly, instantly, provided structure and stability within its athletics department that did not exist. How many times have we had the conversation about who's calling the shots at LSU? Who's making the decisions? Is it the athletic director? Is it the president? Is it the board of supervisors? Is it the governor? Is it boosters? Now you know. It's Scott Woodward. You have a single unified voice that he's going to say, get in line. What happens when there is an inevitable coaching vacancy at LSU? It's going to it happens everywhere. I'm not saying he's going to come in and run people out, but it's inevitable. What happens? Well, the guy making those decisions pulled off 2 of the most significant hires in college sports in the last decade. Maybe even further back than that. He got Chris Peterson away from Boise when everybody every year tried, and he never budged until Scott Woodward convinced him to go to Seattle. And he got Jimbo Fisher out of Tallahassee and got him to Florida State. That's the guy who will be making the next hires for your athletic department. What about this lingering issue with Will Wade and the NCAA? Well, the president of the NCAA is Mark Emmert. Scott Woodward was Mark Emmert's chief lieutenant at LSU. And Emmert, when he became the president at the University of Washington, handpicked Woodward to go be his AD there. Now, that guy seems to be a pretty good ally in the NCAA offices for LSU as they face uncertainty with the NCAA and the basketball program. That seems like a win. What about fundraising? Do you realize in the Advocates report of LSU's, the fiscal report from the 2017-2018 school year, LSU fundraising was down $1.8 million. Let me say that again. LSU, Louisiana State University, fundraising, money coming in from donors, down $1.8 million a year ago. And Scott Woodward, you have a guy that is a noted fundraiser who knows how to rally people and rally support for a cause. He oversaw two massive projects, the renovation of Husky Stadium in Seattle and the renovation of Kyle Field in College Station. That's the guy who's now your lead fundraiser, the face of your athletics department. And what's more, something that every LSU fan at some level fears every time someone here is successful is what happens if they leave. How many times do we have to answer that question about Will Wade before the FBI stuff? Oh, man, what happens if he leaves? What if he goes to Duke? What if he goes to North Carolina? What if he goes to the NBA? Nick Saban got everybody skittish. You finally had something good and you lost it to something better. And so everybody's programmed to think that guy's going to leave too. Do you realize what Scott Woodward just left? Texas A&M has one of the largest endowments in the country. Forget public-private. They have a top 10 endowment, period. They have a larger endowment at A&M than some Ivy League schools. They have more money than God. They've got facilities. He's got his coaches in place. He has an administration that supported him implicitly, a gigantic alumni base that is super loyal. What do you want? Like, he could have kicked his feet up on the desk for the next decade and chilled and watched the machine work. And he left that for a state school in a cash-strapped time where fundraising is off, where fan discontent is high, where the NCAA is about to start snooping around your basketball program. He left the penthouse for this? Why? Because it was his dream job. Because it's home. Because he loves LSU as much as you love LSU. And he's not leaving. What could he possibly leave for? He just left the best possible situation that you could ever imagine on paper to come home. But I would say most importantly, all of that is fantastic. And all of that stabilizes LSU for a decade or longer. But maybe most importantly is when you turn back the clock and look at what's happened under Joe Oliva's watch. And yesterday I chronicled a lot of the good, and there was a lot of good. And I think it's important to note that. But there was also a lot of bad. Trent Johnson flamed out. Nikki Fargas certainly hasn't done what many anticipated she would when she was hired. There was the Pat Murphy embarrassment. There was Joe Oliva flirting with Tennessee in the summer of 2011. There was Arkansas with their feigned interest in Les Miles, which he parlayed into a bigger raise in 2012. Joe Oliva tried and failed to get the SEC schedule altered with the permanent opponents. There was the 2015 Les Miles circumstance in November, the flirtation with Jimbo, and they couldn't close the deal. Les is fired 4 games into 2016. There was the Hurricane Matthew disaster, the Tom Herman bungled situation, rushing Ed Ogeron to the podium. You fired Johnny Jones, the Will Wade wiretap situation, Wade suspended all the way up until the very end. And there were so many black eyes and so many public missteps and so many general embarrassments that it led to this point in this general feeling of negativity around this entire fan base. And you know that is true. It was divisive to the point where the day LSU was going to win its first basketball conference title in a decade, you had an angry mob with banners and signs and chanting at every opportunity that the athletic director had to go. That's divisive. That's negative. With one decision, all of that is washed away. Because this is going to be unanimously, which never happens. There's some hyperbole for you. This is going to be unanimously lauded by every LSU fan in every LSU circle. It is a damn good day to be an LSU fan today.